am recording this on September 10th, 2024, and I must report that College Football 25 has me absorbed. It has bewitched me, body and soul.
Touchdown, Oklahoma! And the pummeling has started.
Does that mean College Football 25 is a particularly good football game, or even a particularly good sports game? Well, we'll get to that in a second. Right now, I think it's important to talk about what makes college football distinct. Pro franchises pick up and move when a billionaire gets bored, and with fewer teams, fandoms are spread out across larger areas. College football, as well as other college sports, have the scale and grandeur of professional sports, but also have deeper ties to people's lives and personal histories. The game's traditions and rivalries in some cases go back more than a century. Some believe the Kansas-Missouri rivalry can be traced back to political violence preceding the Civil War, an evocative history that may or may not be true. If you can't tell, I am a fan of the Oklahoma Sooners. Norman, Oklahoma, where the school is located, is part of where my family is from. I have family who worked at the university, played in the marching band, and a few that attended. I am Sooner born and Sooner bred, and when I die, I'll be Sooner dead. Here's an awkward and chubby 8-year-old me taking a picture with Bob Stoops, one of Oklahoma's great football coaches and the last one to win a national championship. This doesn't mean that people don't have personal histories with pro sports teams or anything like that, but I think a lot more people share stories like mine. And then, with college football specifically, there's the importance of the regular season. In previous years, a single loss or two could knock your team out of postseason play, and in olden times, before the college football playoff, a few losses could easily remove a team from conference and national championship contention. As we'll discuss, things are different now, but the importance of college football's regular season means there are Saturdays in October and November with earth-shattering magnitudes not unlike championship games, causing ripple effects across the entire sport, from conference standings to national rankings. Strategically, due to, among other things, the wide variety of talent and the sheer number of teams, football at the collegiate level is more diverse, allowing for play that isn't necessarily impossible at the professional level, but more impractical. Schemes like the read option, triple option, and run-pass option are used in the NFL today, but college football allows for those offensive strategies and others to be much more heavily emphasized, representing the foundation of entire offenses rather than portions of them. But perhaps what's most important to understand about college football right now is that the sport is undergoing multiple massive transformations. Name, image, and likeness rights granted to college athletes mean players can finally make money from those things, at least officially, and NIL collectives are now a part of how teams recruit players. Conferences, once aligned by geographic region, are consolidating, driven largely by TV contracts. Now, Stanford, as one example, is in the Atlantic Coast Conference, and of course, the expansion of the college football playoff from 4 to 12 teams creates a whole host of interesting questions, possibilities, and discussion points. A 12-team playoff with automatic qualifiers for conference champions means playoff teams will be a mix of automatic qualifiers as well as those ranked high enough by the subjective rankings of the playoff selection committee. All this is the context that makes College Football 25 so interesting to talk about. How do you represent such an idiosyncratic, colorful sport? How do you confront the new reality of NIL deals and super conferences? For some, asking and analyzing these questions may be an exercise in futility. Innovation, creativity, and quality were made secondary characteristics of sports video games a long time ago. Electronic Arts today is less a video game company and more of a microtransaction company. While EA is not the sole developer of sports games, they do have the biggest portfolio and have enthusiastically contributed to the degradation of the genre. Live service economies, which infest sports games and other genres, do not exist to make games better, they actually do the opposite, but exist to create recurrent revenue. College Football 25's Ultimate Team is no exception. Like EA's other Ultimate Teams, it is a dystopic pay-to-win model that at best has cool ideas that would be better if they were unconnected to a real money economy, and at worst is knowingly exploitative. With all that in mind, I do feel a slight dissonance in treating College Football 25 as if it's not just another annual sports game meant to buffer EA's net bookings. but I also don't think that's the correct way to think about it. College football is a sport that deserves a good video game. All sports do, the actions of an avaricious publisher notwithstanding. Some of my favorite things in College Football 25 aren't necessarily new. A lot of stuff has been inherited from Madden, but I do think it's important to remember that college and professional football do have distinct audiences. There's definitely an overlap in that Venn diagram, but it is in no way all-encompassing. And I also think there are plenty of people like me who haven't touched a new Madden in years, and College Football 25's provided a great opportunity to jump back into football video games and see how things are. So with all that said, on the field and between the white lines, College Football 25 is pretty good. Most of the time. One specific area I've really had fun with is running the football. It has never felt better to read blocks, make jump cuts, and navigate defenders. In older football games, there was really no reason not to sprint, especially when controlling a running back. On offense and defense, College Football 25, on the other hand, rewards patience, control, and timing. Players, for the most part, control with a good mix of precision and weight. An elusive running back can hit small holes and weave through defenders, his success determined by a combination of the back's athletic ability, how defenders react, and how fast I can react with my thumb. This makes zone schemes particularly exciting because, unlike other blocking schemes, zone blocking doesn't assign a specific defender a blocker. Instead, it's a zone, or area, that the blocker takes, meaning alleys develop somewhat unpredictably. As a defender, pressing the dive button to make a tackle isn't a guaranteed hit. It's more prudent to stay steady and controlled. One ability I really love is strafe, where your player keeps their shoulders square and moves laterally rather than straight ahead. This makes scraping over the top as a linebacker or keeping the edge as a defensive end easier, as you can wait for the precise moment to shift your momentum forward for a tackle rather than chasing down ball carriers with a dead sprint. As an old coach of mine used to say, offense is played forward and backward, and defense is played side to side. In the passing game, placement passing might be my single favorite gameplay feature. It allows you to spot the ball in different locations around the receiver as you make the throw. Along with controlling the trajectory of your pass, which has been standard for more than a decade, placement passing allows you to legitimately throw receivers open, placing the ball away from defenders and leading receivers to open field. It makes certain routes difficult to defend, and if you're capable of pulling it off, allows you to throw into tighter windows. Every now and then, though, player movement, which can look pretty realistic, hits a snag and suddenly becomes uneven, unnatural, and uncanny. Players can get stuck on one another or snap like rubber bands. Sometimes this results in a harmless, janky-looking play. Other times, it can lead to frustrating consequences. A suspicion I have, and before I say this, I need to stress that what I'm about to say is casual speculation. I have no proof of anything. But Madden switched to the Frostbite engine from Madden 18, and College Football 25 uses it as well. There are multiple stories about developers using Frostbite for things it wasn't built for, like looter shooters or fantasy RPGs. I'm curious if College Football 25's sloppy, quap-like physics are byproducts of that engine. There are also times players don't react as quickly or precisely as you want them to. I consistently have issues with players missing blocks, turning to block defenders that aren't important, or refusing to jump routes. It's possible some of these instances are determined by player ratings, like play recognition, but the plays I've seen NPCs miss are so obvious and makeable, and happen consistently enough, that I tend to think most cases are design flaws. There also seems to be something off with switching players, but I'm having a tough time putting a finger on it. One of the new additions to gameplay is Switch Stick, a quick way to switch which defender you're controlling in pass coverage. But Switch Stick only applies to defenders in pass coverage. If you're playing a defender who is engaged in the pass rush, you can't use Switch Stick to change players. In my years playing football video games, I've always allowed the AI to handle pass coverage while I rushed, so precisely how useful Switch Stick is, I'm not really sure. Yet with that, I still find myself in little moments where pressing circle, the traditional switch player button, doesn't always seem to switch me to the best player. And when I think back to all my years playing older football games, I can't think of ever being consistently frustrated by switching players. In College Football 25, it happens pretty regularly. This could be user error, it could be an awkward gameplay mechanic, and it could be a mix of both. College Football 25 does not have an official comprehensive tutorial that covers everything, which is too bad because there are some really dynamic and in-depth systems here. To learn various things, I've skimmed Reddit threads, forum posts, and even considered watching a video or two, but you know.
Ain't nobody got time for that.
There are a lot of little details like pre-snap abilities and buttons for runners and defenders that have taken me a bit to learn, remember, and then work into gameplay. It's like having to relearn how to lock a GPS-guided anti-boat missile when I get obsessed with VTOL every few months. But when you are able to put everything together, College Football 25 becomes a lot of fun. Reading defenses or checking into different coverages when an offense goes no huddle is exciting, and the game's brilliant sound design makes it feel like you've turned on the TV for a must-watch Saturday matchup. I know it may seem strange, but this absolutely gives me goosebumps. Part of that is a really good performance by Reese Davis, who does play-by-play for most of the games, alongside Jesse Palmer and David Pollock. Davis is a great broadcaster with a booming voice perfect for exuberant touchdown calls.
Touchdown, Central Michigan! And inside a minute to go, and they've got the lead.
Chris Fowler and Kirk Herbstreit get the premier games, like playoff games in the national championship. I'm a fan of them both, I think they're good in the booth, but I have to say, Fowler's delivery falls a little flat for me. Like, as an example, here's one of my all-time favorite Chris Fowler calls.
Direct snap, Brooks trying to make something happen. He breaks free. Kennedy Brooks says, forget the field goal. Win it with a touchdown.
And here's one from the game.
And he runs it in for the score. Touchdown, Central Michigan.
Again, one more for comparison.
And the Norman conquest is complete with the historic four-peat for Oklahoma.
Oh, wait, sorry, that's not, no, oh, wait, here we go.
Gabriel. Pontus touchdown, Nick Anderson.
And the game.
In for the score. Touchdown, Chippewa.
Davis's calls sound really natural and blend with the game's audio really well. Fowler's sound more video gamey. Overall, I think College Football 25 captures the sights, sounds, and ambience of college football pretty well. The personality of fan bases and stadiums is one thing that makes college football unique, from the way the stadium and field looks to the wide variety of pregame traditions and festivities. Fans and cheerleaders will even do their team's hand signals, which is a nice touch. Curiously, one hand signal, which also happens to be the most important one, is absent from College Football 25, but I'd hate to get off topic or hurt someone's feelings. The variety of environments makes it fun to play on the road and see what other stadiums are like, as well as to take on the challenge of dealing with their deafening sound and intensity. If you thought Margate was tough, just wait till you play Oregon at Autzen Stadium or go on the road to Happy Valley. Home field advantage really matters. Louder environments condense what you're able to do on offense and may even force you to alter strategies or play at a different tempo. Of College Football 25's modes, Road to Glory and Dynasty are what I would consider to be its most interesting, with Dynasty being the premier mode as well as just the better one. Road to Glory feels like it needs a total makeover, with its bizarre camera angles, grindy progression, and slow leveling serving as major turnoffs. Not that this is necessarily surprising, Road to Glory had similar problems way back in the NCAA football days. The idea of playing as one player in a football game is a sound one, but the way it's implemented here feels more like a cool mod you'd find on Nexus mods, rather than a full-fledged mode. When creating your character, you pick from 4 recruit levels, which works like a difficulty setting. A 5-star recruit is going to be much more capable and likely to see the field much earlier. On the lower end, you're likely to begin your career deeper in the depth chart and need to work your way into a starting position. Conceptually, this makes sense, but the process is monotonous. Getting your character to earn a starting spot consists of completing repetitive mini-games. Do well enough, and your player will eventually start. As you earn experience, you can upgrade your player's abilities, but this happens pretty slowly. And if you do decide to start as a 2-star player, you may not have a great time. My first character was a 2-star middle linebacker, but he's so slow and sluggish that it's just not fun to grind week to week waiting for eventual upgrades. Playing as a higher ranked linebacker is better, but all of Road to Glory's other flaws are still present. As a linebacker, you'll have to keep your eye in the backfield and follow your assignment, whether it be zone or man coverage. The standard camera angle doesn't help with this, as it means your eyes have to bounce between the top and bottom of the screen as you play. You can change the camera to a quasi-third-person mode, but then you don't have enough peripheral vision to see the field around you. Quarterback and running back are perhaps the two positions Road to Glory works with the best, and it's actually really cool to use that third-person camera as a running back, bringing you much closer to the action. If you play as a quarterback, for whatever reason, you're suddenly not able to use the standard camera angle, which is odd and frustrating. I think part of the problem is that football on an individual level just doesn't translate well into a video game, if not at least into a football video game that isn't built from the ground up to be played as an individual player. College Football 25 has depth when you're playing as an entire offense or defense, but when that's whittled away down to one player, a lot of that depth is lost. Every position in football, and really every position in every sport, is full of complexities, but football video games aren't made to comprehensively simulate those complexities on an individual level. So I'm not a fan of Road to Glory. I've tried playing different positions and recruit levels, but I get bored pretty quickly. Luckily, all of College Football 25's best elements coalesce most potently in Dynasty mode. Create a coach, pick a program, and manage the team's roster and recruiting. As with other sports games, there are various elevations at which you can manage your Dynasty. You can go the general manager route, managing the roster and recruiting while simulating the games, or take a complete hands-on approach, managing the entire roster, playing the games, and even using custom-made playbooks to personalize your team's strategy and roster construction. Currently, I'm in my 8th year coaching the Central Michigan Chippewas, and have built the school from a mid-level MAC program into an annual national championship contender. A big chunk of your success in Dynasty comes down to your own skill, if you're playing the games, that is. Winning makes everything easier, improving the status and prestige of your school, both in the eyes of recruits and national rankings, the most important among those being the college football playoff rankings. A rising tide lifts all boats, so as you win more games and get ranked higher, you'll recruit better and have a better chance at playing on bigger stages in bigger games. A positive feedback loop that you'll use to build your school into a contender, or maintain it as such. I've never been especially good at sports games, but I have found the varsity difficulty to be a pretty decent challenge. I've come to largely dominate my MAC opponents, while games against higher ranked and more talented teams, especially in the playoff, tend to be much more difficult. It's really fun because if you make the playoff, it's like your season ends with a series of boss fights, each with escalating stakes. And this is also where the talent discrepancy is exposed the most. Because there are so many teams and players in college football, there is a wider degree of talent than there is in the NFL, where there's only 32 teams. I factored this into my decision to play as Central Michigan by creating an offense that compensated for this talent discrepancy, the T-Gun, named this way because I'm not very creative. The T-Gun is a run-first, ball-control offense that prioritizes chewing clock and slowly moving downfield. Most pass plays are made up of short to intermediate routes, like hooks, curls, drag routes, and in routes that make up for times when the running game stalls, like third and longs or longer goal-to-go situations. Part of the reason I approached my Dynasty like this is that it meant I wouldn't need to heavily recruit positions like quarterback, wide receiver, or running back. Solid 3-star recruits can get the job done, so I don't need to compete for 4 or 5-star players. Where I've placed most of my recruiting focus is offensive line and definitely most heavily defense, where I run the 4-2-5, though don't ask why because I really don't know.
What is it with you? I just think they're neat.
When you begin your Dynasty, you can either select a pre-made coach or create a coach from scratch. To begin with, you get 3 archetypes to choose from, each of which comes with a skill tree that gives various benefits, like recruiting bonuses and player bonuses. If you choose a pre-made coach, you're going to start with a pre-made skill tree, kind of like starting an RPG at mid-level. You'll have a head start with bonuses and such, but you'll obviously have to level up from what's there. You can't respec your coach. Creating a coach from scratch means you get to choose your focus and build from there, which is what I did for my coach, initially speccing into the recruiting branch, but eventually spending points in tactician. Your offensive and defensive coordinators, assuming you're the head coach, have skill trees of their own, and while you can't upgrade them like your coaches, their skills do stack. I tend to pick coordinators whose trees are either built toward recruiting or tactician. The upshot being that even as I recruit lesser talent, the bonuses from my abilities and my staff elevate those players beyond their initial skill ratings, getting better play out of lesser talent. The level cap for your coach is 50, and you only get 10 coach points, which you spend on upgrades, per level, so you won't be able to unlock all the abilities across the entirety of the skill tree. This is a restriction I like. It makes you really consider how you want to build your coach, and makes hiring and replacing coordinators impactful and important. The development team's philosophy behind this design is that no coach is great at everything, an approach I really appreciate, adding another layer of depth outside the games themselves. Coordinators matter, both at the collegiate and professional levels, and it's also fun to pick where you'd think real-world coaches would land on the skill tree. But while the skill tree is an essential part of building and maintaining your coach, the tree itself, I think, suffers from what a lot of modern video game skill trees suffer from. More upgrades than is necessary, upgrades that are more expensive than they are useful, and upgrades that cost the same but aren't as useful. As an example, the Pay It Forward ability grants bonus XP to a position group when players from that group are selected in the top 3 rounds of the NFL draft. This is an ability that's pretty contextual, especially if you plan on building up a smaller program, where your players will seldom be talented enough to be taken that high in the draft. Compare that to the tactician archetype, which gives players bonuses to various skills. Because these bonuses apply directly to player ratings, it means tacticians' abilities are utilized on every play. Both tacticians' and motivators' abilities cost the same to unlock, but the tactician abilities are utilized more often, making them more valuable. Head coaches get 2 additional archetypes, Program Builder and CEO. The upgrades here are more expensive, but again, many are highly contextual. In Program Builder, the second tier of stability improvements puts an extra year on your contracts. In total, it costs 99 coach points to unlock. Is having an extra year on your contract useful? Yeah, it could be. Is it worth the investment when there are other skills with abilities that are utilized far more often? I don't think so. And this is true across the entire skill tree. And again, with a level cap of 50 and only getting 10 coach points per level, I think it makes the most sense to spec into abilities that are constantly in effect, rather than abilities that have specific use cases. A counter argument here might be that it should be the coordinators that fill out the basic archetype abilities, while your head coach gives you the opportunity to expand into more specialized roles. But coaching staffs, like rosters, are ephemeral. With Central Michigan, I've already had multiple offensive and defensive coordinators, and I usually have to replace at least one every offseason. Conceptually, Dynasty Mode's RPG-like skill tree is an idea I love, and for the most part, I've enjoyed flipping through it and thinking about how I've wanted to spec my coach in relation to the type of program I want to build. But it's a system that needs more iteration and maybe a bit of an economic overhaul. On the recruiting side of things, I jumped into Dynasty Mode without much of an idea of how recruiting worked, and figured I'd eventually learn what all this stuff meant. After pouring dozens of hours into Dynasty Mode, I can happily report that I still don't know what all this stuff means. Recruiting is unpredictable, prone to sudden change, and influenced by dozens of factors, including school prestige, coach prestige, offensive and defensive playstyle, geographic location, and your coach's recruiting pipeline, which gives you a recruiting boost for a certain region of the country. In season, between recruiting and playing games, Dynasty has a great complementary back and forth of death by menu browsing and actually playing a football game. The recruiting game ebbs and flows. You'll be disappointed by a recruit slipping away at the last second, but you'll also discover underrated players that aren't attracting interest from other schools. Among the different categories that affect recruiting, some, like your school's academic prestige, can't be changed. Others, like your status as a championship contender, are determined by your roster composition and your team's current ranking. It has both long and short-term factors. Building a roster is all about finding the talent that fits your offensive and defensive schemes, and whose interest hopefully aligns with your school cool. Developing an offensive and defensive identity is important, if not extremely helpful. Though I will say I'm not sure how impactful player physical and mental attributes are across the board. There are a lot of them, and they have different tiers. One of the best quarterbacks I recruited has the field general mental ability, which, among other things, briefly alerts me to defenders that are about to blitz. As you'd imagine, this is immensely useful and allows me to check into other plays or call routes that exploit the holes created by the blitzing defender. It's a lot of fun. So you can get pretty granular and pinpoint the exact kind of player you prefer. Though it would be nice if there were an easier way to see what all these mental and physical abilities mean and how they exactly affect your players. Recent RPGs like Pillars of Eternity and Baldur's Gate 3 allow you to see the definitions of keywords in menus so you don't constantly have to Google stuff. This would be helpful in College Football 25. On the recruiting board, you can move the cursor over to player abilities, but it doesn't do anything. What if a little box appeared explaining what the ability does? I'm not a developer, I don't know what systems that would involve or how a feature like that would complicate things, but the point is that it would be nice to have information more easily accessible, especially with College Football 25's armada of menus and tabs. For the most part though, I think you're probably fine as long as you're recruiting good talent. College football rosters go through constant churn, and it's impossible to have a depth chart that's suited to your exact desires every single year. Building a roster means you have to consider how your team's roster looks now, how it looks like it's going to look in a year or two, and anticipate what gaps you'll need to fill with the transfer portal, another big addition to real-world college football that will likely change how you recruit. Transfers, just like recruits, need scholarships, but during the season, you're not sure how the portal will look or what players will be there when it opens. I've come to save a few scholarships for transfers every year, all contingent on how my roster looks heading into the offseason. Name, image, and likeness rights that are now rightfully granted to athletes have changed the recruiting game, but in the real world, it's a wild west, and no one really knows how it's going to evolve. College Football 25 also seems unsure how exactly to handle NIL, so it's abstracted away into school grades and player preferences, like your school's brand strength. What Dynasty doesn't have is an actual NIL fund you can use to persuade recruits or any deeper representation of NIL's effect on recruiting. Considering how nebulous and litigious the NIL space has been, it's an omission I understand, but as NIL and player pay grows and becomes more established, I'm curious how future college football games will adapt, if at all. But even if the recruiting and transfer game is somewhat opaque, I've come to have fun with it. It's exciting to wonder how a crop of players will develop or if you finally nabbed that future Heisman Trophy winner. Recruiting a player and watching them develop, especially if they're a player you often take direct control over, is really satisfying. I do wish it were a little more transparent about how this process works. On-field performance, off-season training, coach abilities, and other factors all contribute to how a player's skills increase, but it's tough to tell what skills are prioritized or when they level up. Player pages have a status bar showing how close they are to leveling up and where their skills are capped, but the process happens automatically. Unless you're manually tracking a player's skill ratings, it's hard to tell how exactly they're improving. One missing feature from recruiting is the ability to make custom recruits during the offseason and then compete to have them on your team. In the older NCAA games, this was a fun feature to exploit. You'd make a punter with really bad punting skills but a great throwing arm, heavily recruit them, and switch their position to quarterback during the season. I don't know if the development team would be okay with that specific exploit returning, but I do hope we get to see custom recruits in future college football games. Another new-ish addition to gameplay is College Football 25's wear and tear system, which simulates player fatigue and health during games and even over the season. The right side of the green circle around a player tracks stamina, while the left tracks health, and you'll see in real time when either side degrades. Stamina and health are obviously not new additions to football video games, but College Football 25's implementation of it is done well. When players run out of stamina, they'll feel noticeably sluggish and slow, as expected, but the impact of continuous play and hard hits affect your roster management and even the way you play. I often find myself digging into the depth chart mid-game to give players breaks, especially running backs. As my offense is run-centric, I've turned my backfield largely into that of running back by committee. Turn up the sliders on the substitution menu, and players will automatically alternate between plays, barring there's enough time. Splitting the running back role between a few backs allows me to run my offense in a way that would wear out a single running back carrying most of the load. This has ripple effects on my program, as I now tend to recruit more backs than I need and even occasionally move receivers into the backfield for additional help. And to avoid injury, I'll take plays out of bounds when I'm able to, rather than crash into defenders and fight for an extra yard or two. Seeing your players grow and develop, dealing with injuries, or pushing through them in big games are all examples of what I think the greatest strength of sports games is. Just like their real-world counterparts, sports games are great story generators, and College Football 25 is no different. Already in my few years with Central Michigan, I've played in some incredibly intense playoff games with amazing comebacks and last-second touchdowns. In my first year, I was upset by Toledo in the MAC championship game, which knocked me out of the college football playoff. I was very disappointed. The next season, I faced Toledo in the MAC championship again, and the outcome was different. One of my favorite players, my boy Frank Moon here, transferred for his junior season and ended up leading the country in rushing and won running back of the year, but not Heisman, which was dumb. During the offseason, his speed was improved to 99, making him the fastest and probably the best running back I've had in my time playing Central Michigan. And in his senior year, he not only won running back of the year, but this time took home the Heisman as well. See, Dabo, the transfer portal is fine.
All right. What's this guy's name?
Tyler.
Hey, Tyler. I've listened to enough of you, Tyler.
College football is a special sport, and it's great to see it back in video game form, but the specter of EA clouds a lot of that positivity, as does the years of preceding soulless sports games, which college football at one point was a part of. There are a number of miscellaneous things that can make Dynasty and College Football 25 better, along with bugs and visual hiccups that need fixing. After a few years in Dynasty, a bug stopped me from customizing my schedule, which is a pretty big nuisance. Scheduling tougher opponents can help with recruiting and getting into the playoff, and it's also just fun. I wish I could filter the recruiting board by players who are unsigned and uncommitted rather than having to scroll all the way down the list to see what recruits are left. I really wish there was a better way to organize my depth chart. Ultimate Team has a screen with your lineup and player stats all together, and from this, you can kind of visualize what your team will look like when they take the field. A screen similar to this would be massively helpful for my 4-2-5, a scheme that calls for a lot of hybrid players that can be moved around. So there's a lot of room for growth and improvement here, but with EA in its corner, it's hard to imagine anything but a Madden-like future for the series. EA has not been a good custodian for sports games, which it has dominated for years. The company has actively made the genre worse, from general broken and half-baked features to exploitation in Ultimate Team and the proliferation of microtransactions. I would be silly to expect anything else from future installments of EA's college football, but for now, it's good to have an old friend back.
Pass caught, can he get in? And he will score! Touchdown, Oklahoma!
That kind of play is almost impossible to defend when the quarterback is throwing the ball with that kind of accuracy and time.